Dad who traded me for his spoiled stepson, called angry. I didn't choose his golden loser boy, be a manager at my company. So I told them they're not even my family anymore and to F off. But now they're losing the house and begging for my help. So, this is a long story, but I promise it's worth reading till the end. I'm 28 now and finally feel like I can share this without getting too emotional about it. Names have been changed, obviously, but everything else is exactly how it happened. I grew up in a working class family outside Columbus, Ohio. My parents split when I was 8 after years of arguing about money and dad working too much. Pretty amicable divorce, though. No custody battles or drama. Dad worked construction, mom was a registered nurse at the local hospital. I lived with mom during the week and stayed with dad every other weekend, plus holidays and summer vacation. Standard setup that worked well for everyone. Dad had his own two-bedroom apartment about 20 minutes from mom's house. Nothing fancy but clean with the second bedroom set up specifically for me. Dad and I were really tight back then. Every Saturday morning we'd work on his old pickup truck together in the apartment complex parking lot. He taught me how to change oil, replace spark plugs, basic maintenance stuff. Said every man should know how to take care of his vehicle. We'd spend hours out there, and he'd explain how engines worked, why certain parts were important. Sundays, we'd go fishing at this little lake about an hour outside town. Dad knew all the best spots, and would pack us lunch, and we'd just sit there talking about everything and nothing. Those are honestly some of my best childhood memories. Just me and Dad sitting by that lake, talking about school or sports or whatever was on my mind. During the week, he'd call every couple days just to check in. How was school? Did I need help with homework? Was I being good for mom? Nothing major, but it made me feel like he was still involved even when I wasn't there. That whole dynamic worked great for about 4 years. Then everything changed when I turned 12. Dad met Rebecca at some community event. I think it was a charity fundraiser for the local children's hospital where mom worked. Rebecca was recently divorced with a 9-year-old son named Tyler, who she talked about constantly. At first, everything seemed normal when Dad started dating her. He was happier, more energetic, talked about Rebecca like she was amazing. I met them both for the first time at a pizza place downtown. Rebecca seemed nice enough, asked me about school, said she'd heard so much about me. All the right things. Tyler was just a regular kid, I thought. Maybe a little quiet, but not in a bad way. He seemed more interested in his video game than talking to anyone. They dated for about 6 months before Dad proposed. I remember him being so excited when he told me, said he'd found someone who made him really happy, and that Tyler and I were going to be brothers. The whole thing moved pretty fast, but Dad seemed sure about everything, so I was happy for him. The wedding was small, just immediate family and close friends. I was the ring bearer, which was pretty cool for a 12-year-old. Everyone kept saying how great it was that Dad was getting a second chance at happiness, and how Tyler and I would be such good brothers. Looking back now, I think Rebecca was just really good at playing the role of perfect girlfriend until she got that ring. She said all the right things, included me in conversations, never made me feel like an outsider. But the second they got back from their honeymoon, everything started changing. The first red flag should have been when they went house hunting right after the wedding. Dad had been living in that decent apartment that worked perfectly fine for him and my weekend visits. I had my own room there with a bed, dresser, desk for homework, posters on the walls. But suddenly that wasn't good enough anymore. Rebecca insisted they needed a bigger house in a better neighborhood for the children's sake. She kept talking about how Tyler needed more space to grow up properly and how I should have a real bedroom instead of just an apartment room. So Dad took out this massive mortgage on a 4-bedroom colonial house in one of the newer subdivisions. Way more than he could really afford on a construction worker's salary. But Rebecca convinced him it was an investment in the family's future. When it came time to decide bedrooms, Tyler automatically got the biggest one upstairs with his own bathroom. I got the smaller bedroom in the finished basement. Rebecca said it would be quieter down there for homework, plus I'd have more privacy. What I didn't realize was that this was just the beginning of me getting pushed to the margins of Dad's new life. The changes started subtle, but the pattern was obvious from the beginning. Dad would still hang out with me when I visited on weekends. But now Tyler was always included in everything we did, which would have been fine if it was actually inclusive, but it wasn't really about including both of us. It was about making sure Tyler got attention. We used to throw the football around in the backyard for hours, just me and Dad. But now, suddenly, it became all about teaching Tyler proper throwing technique and catching form. Dad would spend most of the time correcting Tyler's stance, while I just stood there waiting for someone to throw to me. Same thing happened when we worked on the truck. Dad used to let me hand him tools and explain what he was doing. But Tyler got that job now, and I was relegated to watching from the sidelines. When I'd try to ask questions or help out, Dad would say, "Let Tyler learn this first, Then you can have a turn. But somehow Tyler's turn never ended. Then came the bigger stuff that really opened my eyes. Tyler decided he wanted to play travel baseball, which cost about $800 between league fees, equipment, and travel costs. Dad didn't even blink before saying yes and writing the check. Meanwhile, around the same time, I asked if I could join the school chess club, which cost exactly $30 for the whole year. Suddenly, money was tight, and Dad said maybe we could look into it next semester when finances were better. $30 versus $800. But somehow Tyler's activity was essential, while mine was optional. The worst part was how Rebecca started inserting herself into every aspect of my relationship with Dad. If Dad and I were planning to go fishing Saturday morning, she'd suddenly suggest that Tyler really wanted to learn and should come too. But Tyler would just complain the entire time about being bored, not catching anything, wanting to go home and play video games. So we'd end up cutting our fishing trips short after an hour instead of spending the whole morning at the lake like we used to. Or Dad would get frustrated with Tyler's whining, and we just wouldn't go at all because it wasn't worth the hassle. Christmas that first year was a real eye-opener. Tyler's presents took up half the space under the tree. New bike, PlayStation, about $600 worth of stuff. I got some clothes and a $20 gift card. When I couldn't hide my disappointment, Rebecca actually lectured me about how Tyler needed more, because he'd been through a difficult divorce and was still adjusting to having a new stepdad. I wanted to point out that I'd been through the same divorce and was also adjusting to a new family situation, but I could tell that wouldn't go over well. Dad just sat there nodding along like Rebecca's logic made perfect sense. By the time I started high school, the favoritism was impossible to ignore. Tyler was in 7th grade and already getting treated like some kind of prince who could do no wrong. Dad rearranged his entire work schedule around Tyler's baseball games and practices, never missing a single one even if it meant losing money from construction jobs. But when I joined the academic bowl team and we made it to regionals, Dad couldn't come because it conflicted with one of Tyler's regular season games. Not even playoffs, just a regular Tuesday night game that Tyler probably wouldn't even get to play in since he was riding the bench most of the time. The college discussion was when things got really ugly. I was pulling mostly A's and B's, member of National Honor Society, had clear plans to study mechanical engineering at Ohio State. In-state tuition plus financial aid meant it would cost about $12,000 per year, which seemed reasonable. But when I brought up college planning with Dad, he got uncomfortable and started talking about how we'd have to see what we could afford, and maybe I should look into community college first to save money. Meanwhile, Tyler wasn't even in high school yet, and Rebecca was already opening a college savings account for him. She kept talking about how Tyler had so much potential and deserved the best opportunities possible. She had her heart set on him, going to some private university that cost $40,000 per year. I started working part-time during junior year, bagging groceries after school and weekends. Dad said he was proud of my work ethic, but when Rebecca suggested Tyler should get a part-time job too, Dad shut that down immediately. Tyler needed to focus on his studies and baseball. His grades might suffer if he had to work. This was the same Tyler pulling C's and D's in most classes, while I maintained a 3.7 GPA despite working 20 hours per week. But somehow, protecting Tyler's mediocre grades was more important than recognizing my actual achievements. The absolute breaking point came during my senior year. I had been working and saving for 2 years and had managed to put away about $3,000 for college expenses. One weekend when I came to Dad's house, Rebecca pulled me aside for a private conversation. She said Tyler's travel baseball team had been invited to this special tournament in Florida over spring break. It was a huge opportunity for college scouts to see him play, could really help with scholarships down the road. The only problem was they were short about $2,000 for the trip expenses. She asked if I could loan them the money since I had savings, and they'd pay me back by summer for sure. I was 17 years old and probably should have just said no, but I didn't want to be the reason Tyler missed out on opportunities. Plus, Rebecca made it sound like this could really help the whole family financially if Tyler got a baseball scholarship. So I withdrew $2,000 from my savings account and handed it over. Summer came and went with no mention of paying me back. When I finally worked up the courage to ask about it in August, Rebecca got defensive and irritated. She said they'd had unexpected expenses over the summer, and the money had gone toward Tyler's needs. I should be happy to help family instead of keeping track of debts like some kind of loan shark. That was my college money they'd basically stolen, but somehow I was the bad guy for wanting it back. Dad stayed completely silent during this conversation, wouldn't even look me in the eye. I ended up going to community college for my first 2 years to save money, then transferred to Ohio State to finish my mechanical engineering degree. Worked full-time at a local factory to pay for everything myself. Tuition, books, rent, food, everything. Dad would call occasionally, but it was always surface-level small talk. Meanwhile, Tyler was living like a king during his high school years. Dad paid for him to attend expensive baseball camps every summer, bought him a nearly new Honda Civic for his 16th birthday, basically gave him everything I'd never had. The few times I came home for holidays, it was painfully obvious that I was just a guest in that house, while Tyler was the prince. Tyler had turned into exactly what you'd expect from a kid who never heard the word no. Arrogant, entitled, lazy, and completely lacking in basic life skills. He barely graduated high school with a 2.3 GPA and only got into college because Dad paid for an expensive private tutor. But somehow Tyler was still the golden child who could do no wrong in Dad's eyes. When Tyler's college acceptance letter came in, Dad called me specifically to share the good news, like it was some major achievement. I reminded him that I'd graduated summa cum laude from Ohio State's engineering program just 2 months earlier, and he'd barely acknowledged it. I graduated with my engineering degree and landed a decent job at a manufacturing plant about 2 hours from Columbus. Nothing glamorous, but it paid $55,000 starting salary with good benefits. Dad came to graduation, which was nice, but he spent most of the day talking to relatives about Tyler's upcoming freshman year. Moving away for work was honestly the best decision I ever made. Finally got some real distance from all the family drama. Started building my own life with people who actually valued what I brought to the table, instead of treating me like an afterthought. About a year after graduation, I met Sarah through mutual friends at a backyard barbecue. She's an elementary school teacher, originally from Pennsylvania, but moved to Ohio for a teaching position. Down to earth, funny, smart, and she actually listened when I talked, instead of waiting for her turn to speak. We hit it off immediately. Sarah was the first person I'd ever really opened up to about my family situation. At first, she thought I was probably exaggerating or being overly sensitive about normal blended family growing pains. But then she met them at a family barbecue that summer. Dad spent the entire afternoon talking to anyone who would listen about Tyler's college baseball career, even though Tyler was riding the bench and barely played. Meanwhile, my engineering job and recent promotion got maybe 2 minutes of conversation. Rebecca made these passive-aggressive comments to Sarah about how teaching elementary school must be nice, but doesn't pay very well, and maybe she should consider going back to school for something more practical. Real, subtle way of implying that Sarah wasn't good enough. Tyler was there too, home for summer break after his freshman year. Spent the whole time bragging about his fraternity and all the parties they threw, talking about how he was going to be a sports agent or maybe get into sports marketing. When Sarah asked him about his major, he literally said he hadn't decided yet because he was keeping his options open. This was going into sophomore year. After that barbecue, Sarah completely understood why I didn't visit very often. She said it was painfully obvious that Dad had emotionally checked out of being my father years ago and was just going through the motions to avoid feeling guilty. Sarah and I got engaged after dating for 2 years and started planning a small wedding. When it came time to discuss the guest list, we had some tough conversations about whether to invite Dad's side of the family. In the end, I decided to keep the wedding small and only invite people who had actually been supportive of our relationship. Dad and Rebecca came, but Tyler didn't even bother showing up because he had some fraternity party that same weekend. Real nice way to show family support. Dad and Rebecca spent most of the reception talking to other guests about Tyler's plans after graduation. They barely talked to Sarah or me except during the formal family photos. My career started really taking off around this time. Got promoted to senior engineer, then project manager within 3 years. I was making $70,000 by age 26, had bought a nice 3-bedroom house in a good neighborhood. Life was genuinely good. Meanwhile, cracks were starting to show in Dad's perfect second family fantasy. Tyler graduated college with some completely useless communications degree and immediately moved back home because he couldn't find a job that met his inflated expectations. Dad was still financially supporting him, while Tyler bounced between part-time retail jobs and various get-rich-quick schemes. The mortgage on that big house Dad bought was becoming a serious problem too. Construction work had gotten less steady, and Dad was in his mid-50s now, his body starting to wear down from decades of physical labor. Rebecca had never held down a steady full-time job during their entire marriage, just occasional part-time retail positions when money got tight. Tyler wasn't contributing anything financially, despite living there rent-free and eating their food. Dad suggested that Tyler should pay some minimal amount for room and board, but Rebecca shut that down immediately. Tyler was going through a difficult transition period and needed family support, not additional stress. 3 years ago, the manufacturing plant where I worked got bought out by a massive international corporation. They offered generous buyout packages to senior staff or transfers to other facilities in different states. Most people took the buyouts because relocating across the country wasn't realistic. I saw this as a huge opportunity rather than a setback. Used my buyout money plus everything Sarah and I had saved to start my own engineering consulting business. Manufacturing plants everywhere need experienced engineers who understand their processes and can solve complex technical problems. I had 10 years of hands-on experience plus all the right industry connections. It was terrifying at first, going from a steady paycheck to being completely responsible for generating my own income. But Sarah supported me completely and we tightened our budget for the first year, while I built up a client base. But it worked better than I ever imagined. By the end of year 1, I was making more money than I'd ever earned as an employee. By year 2, I had to hire my first subcontractor. By year 3, I had a small team of engineers working for me, and we'd rented actual office space. The business grew faster than I'd expected because word of mouth in manufacturing is everything. Once you prove you can solve problems efficiently and save companies significant money, they tell their colleagues at other companies. I started getting contracts from facilities 3 states away, sometimes flying out for week-long projects. Meanwhile, Dad's financial situation was getting worse every month. Construction work had slowed way down due to economic issues in our area. He was getting fewer jobs, and the ones he did get paid less. His back problems were getting worse too, making it harder to do the physical labor that construction requires. Tyler had briefly moved out after college, but came crawling back home within 6 months when he couldn't afford rent on his retail salary. Rebecca started working full-time for the first time in their marriage, but retail management only pays about $30,000 per year. They were falling behind on mortgage payments, car payments, credit card bills. 2 months ago on a Tuesday evening, my phone rang with Dad's number. We hadn't talked in probably 8 months, not since some awkward small talk at Christmas. "Hey son, how are things going with you and Sarah?" He sounded older than I remembered, more tired and stressed. We made uncomfortable small talk for several minutes before he finally got to the real reason for calling. "I heard through your mom that your consulting business is doing really well these days." "That's fantastic. I'm really proud of what you've accomplished." I thanked him, but could tell there was definitely more coming. Dad had never called just to congratulate me on professional success before. "Listen, I was wondering if maybe you might have some work available for Tyler. He's been having a tough time finding something that really fits his skill set and utilizes his college education. I thought maybe you could give him an opportunity to learn the business." I almost started laughing. Tyler's skill set? What skills exactly? I asked Dad what kind of relevant work experience Tyler had that would apply to engineering consulting. "Well, he's got his college degree, and he's worked several retail management positions. He's a smart kid who learns quickly. He just needs someone to give him a real chance to prove himself." I explained that my business was highly technical engineering consulting for manufacturing facilities. I needed people with engineering degrees, industry certifications, and years of hands-on experience. Tyler had none of those qualifications. "But you could train him on the job, right? He's family, and I know he'd work hard if you gave him the opportunity." There it was. After 15 years of being treated like a second-class citizen, now Tyler needed a job, and suddenly I was important family again. I told Dad I'd think about it and get back to him. Exactly 1 week later, Rebecca called me directly. This was highly unusual since she'd never initiated a phone conversation with me in all the years I'd known her. "I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to talk to you personally about Tyler's employment situation and see if we could work something out." She launched into this elaborate speech about how Tyler was just going through a rough transitional period and needed guidance from a successful role model like me. How it would mean so much to Dad if I could help his son get established in a real career. I pointed out that Tyler wasn't Dad's biological son. He was her son from her previous marriage. And considering how I'd been treated as secondary family for 15 years, while Tyler got priority in everything, it was pretty ironic that now they wanted my help. Rebecca got immediately defensive. "That's not fair at all. We always treated you like a full member of this family. Tyler has always considered you his big brother." I reminded her about the $2,000 she'd borrowed from my college savings and never paid back. About how Tyler got the master bedroom while I got stuck in the basement. About the car Dad bought for Tyler while I worked part-time to afford community college. Those were completely different circumstances. Tyler had different needs at the time, and we did what we thought was best for both of you boys. I told her I wasn't interested in hiring Tyler for a position he wasn't qualified for, and ended the call. Sure enough, Tyler himself called me 3 days later. This was literally the first time we'd had a direct conversation in over 2 years. "Dude, what's your deal? Mom said you basically told her to forget about giving me a job opportunity. That's pretty messed up. I calmly explained once again that I run a specialized engineering consulting firm, and he doesn't have any relevant education or experience that would qualify him for the work we do. Come on, man. It can't be that complicated. You just go look at machines and tell people how to fix them, right? I could totally learn that stuff. I'm not stupid. The arrogance was absolutely unbelievable. He thought 10 years of engineering education and professional experience was something any random person could just pick up in a few weeks. I suggested that if he was genuinely interested in engineering, he could go back to school and get the proper education and certifications. Why should I have to waste years going back to school when you could just teach me what I need to know on the job? We're supposed to be family, aren't we? Family helps each other out. There was that magic word again. Family. Where exactly was all this family loyalty when I was working part-time to pay for textbooks while Tyler was getting his college tuition handed to him? Tyler then made a comment that really pushed me over the edge. He said maybe I was just jealous because I'd always been Dad's favorite growing up, and this was my petty way of getting revenge now that the tables had turned. I told him he was absolutely right about one thing. Dad definitely had a clear favorite over the years. But being the favorite son hadn't exactly worked out well for him, had it? Here he was at 25 years old, living with his parents, working part-time retail, begging his stepbrother for career assistance. He got angry and started yelling about how I'd turned into a bitter person who didn't care about family loyalty. Then he hung up on me without saying goodbye. About 6 weeks ago, my mom called with some concerning news about Dad's situation. She'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Dad and Rebecca were in serious financial trouble and facing foreclosure on their house. Apparently, they'd missed several mortgage payments over the past year, and the bank had officially started foreclosure proceedings. They had 60 days to either pay what they owed plus penalties or vacate the property. Tyler had been absolutely no help whatsoever with the financial crisis. Still living there rent-free, still bouncing between part-time retail jobs, still talking about his big plans that never materialized into actual income. Rebecca was working 2 different retail positions now, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover their monthly expenses. Dad was taking whatever construction work he could find, but his chronic back problems were getting worse, and he couldn't handle the physical demands like he used to. Some days he couldn't work at all because of pain and muscle spasms. Mom said Dad was too proud to directly ask family members for financial help, but Rebecca had been making phone calls to various relatives, seeing if anyone could loan them money to avoid losing the house. Apparently, they needed about $15,000 to get current on payments and avoid foreclosure. Here's the thing that really got to me. I could easily write that check without it affecting my lifestyle at all. My consulting business had been incredibly successful, and I had more money in savings than they probably realized. But why should I bail them out of problems they'd created through years of poor financial decisions? Last week, Dad called again, and this time, he sounded completely defeated. His voice was shaky, and he seemed like he'd aged 10 years since our last conversation. Son, I need to ask you something, and it's not easy for me to have this conversation. He explained the entire foreclosure situation in detail, though I already knew most of it from Mom. Asked if there was any possible way I could help them out with a loan to save the house. I know we haven't always been as close as we probably should have been over the years, but you're my son, and I'm really hoping you'll help family during this difficult time. I asked him point blank where Tyler was in all this financial planning. Wasn't Tyler also family? Shouldn't a 25-year-old man be contributing something to help save his childhood home? Tyler's doing what he can, but he doesn't have the kind of resources or income that you do. He's still trying to get his career established. I actually laughed out loud at that response. Tyler was doing what he could? What exactly was he doing besides living rent-free and working 20 hours per week at a cell phone store? Dad got quiet for a long moment. I know you're probably angry about some things that happened when you were younger. Maybe I made some mistakes back then. Some mistakes? I told him it wasn't just some mistakes. It was 15 straight years of being treated like an outsider in my own father's house while Tyler got handed everything he ever wanted. Look, I may not have handled everything perfectly, but that doesn't mean you should just stand by and let us lose our home. I told Dad I needed time to think about everything and would call him back soon. But honestly, I'd already made up my mind. 2 days after Dad's call, Rebecca phoned me in what can only be described as full panic mode. She was crying before she even finished saying hello. Please, you absolutely have to help us. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye about everything, but we're all family here. Tyler considers you his big brother, and this is going to devastate him. I corrected her right away. Tyler was her biological son and Dad's stepson. He'd never been my brother in any meaningful sense of the word. Don't be like that. We raised you as part of this family for years. You lived in our house, ate our food, we supported you through high school and college? I nearly choked on that statement. They raised me? I raised myself while living primarily with my mother and working part-time jobs to pay for my own expenses. They provided a basement bedroom every other weekend and occasional meals. Rebecca started sobbing and saying they had no idea what they were going to do or where they'd live. How could they possibly start over at their ages? What would happen to Tyler if he had to move back in with relatives? I calmly suggested several practical solutions. They could downsize to a more affordable apartment. Tyler could get a full-time job and start contributing to household expenses like any other adult. They could make some mature financial decisions instead of living beyond their means for the past decade. She got angry then and started yelling at me through the tears. Called me selfish and heartless for turning my back on family when they needed help most. Said Tyler was dealing with depression and anxiety about his future, and I was basically kicking him while he was down. I pointed out that Tyler had been struggling with basic adult responsibilities his entire life because nobody had ever made him face real consequences for his choices. Maybe losing the house would provide exactly the reality check he needed to finally grow up. She hung up on me after screaming that I'd regret not helping family when they really needed me. Yesterday afternoon, Tyler showed up unannounced at my office building, just walked right past my office manager and barged into my private office like he owned the place. We need to have a serious conversation right now. I told him to sit down and make it quick because I had an important client conference call scheduled in 30 minutes. He launched into this whole prepared speech about how I was being petty and vindictive over ancient history, how Dad had always done his absolute best as a father, and I was holding grudges over trivial stuff that happened years ago when we were just kids. Trivial stuff? You mean like getting a car bought for you while I worked part-time to afford community college? Like getting your college tuition paid while I took out student loans? Like getting the master bedroom while I lived in the basement? Tyler got defensive and said none of that was his fault because he was just a child at the time. He didn't ask Dad to treat him differently or give him special advantages. I asked him what he'd done as an adult to acknowledge the inequality or try to make things right. Had he ever suggested that maybe Dad should treat both sons fairly? Had he ever tried to build a genuine relationship with me based on mutual respect? He couldn't come up with answers to any of those questions because he'd never even thought about it from my perspective. Then, he played what he thought was his winning card. Look, I know you probably hate me for whatever reason, but don't take it out on Dad and Mom. They don't deserve to lose their house because of problems between you and me. I told him he was right about one thing. This situation wasn't really about Dad and Rebecca anymore. This was about him finally being forced to confront reality after 25 years of being shielded from consequences. You've spent your entire life getting things handed to you that you never earned. College tuition paid, car purchased, room and board provided well into your 20s. And what exactly do you have to show for all those advantages? You're 25 with no marketable skills, no work ethic, and no independence. Maybe losing the house will force you to actually become a functional adult. Tyler got furious and started yelling about how I was jealous and bitter, how I'd turned into a cold, calculating person who didn't care about family bonds or loyalty. I told him I cared about real family relationships plenty. I had a wife who supported my dreams, a mother who'd always been there for me, and in-laws who treated me with genuine respect and kindness. That was my actual family. As for him, his mother, and their longtime enabler, they could figure out their own financial problems like other adults do. I was done being the backup plan for people who'd never made me a priority. He stormed out of my office after saying I'd be sorry when Dad ended up getting seriously hurt because of my selfishness and greed. This morning, I received a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, the message was from Rebecca using someone else's phone. The sheriff's department came to the house today with official eviction papers. We have exactly 2 weeks to pack everything and get out. I really hope you're satisfied with yourself now. I showed the text to Sarah over breakfast, and she asked if I felt guilty about not bailing them out financially. She said she'd support whatever decision I made, but wanted to know how I was processing everything emotionally. Honestly, I don't feel bad about it at all. These people made deliberate choices for 15 straight years. They chose to prioritize Tyler's wants over my basic needs. They chose to live significantly beyond their financial means. They chose to enable a grown man who refuses to take responsibility for his own life. Now they're facing the natural consequences of those choices, and suddenly I'm supposed to swoop in and save the day? With money I earned through years of hard work and sacrifice that they never acknowledged or appreciated? I built my success despite their lack of support, not because of it. Every single achievement in my life happened while they were focused exclusively on propping up their golden child. And now that their golden child has turned out to be completely worthless, they want me to fix the mess they created. Sarah says she's genuinely proud of me for setting healthy boundaries and refusing to let them guilt me into solving problems they brought on themselves. My real family, her, my mom, my in-laws, close friends, they all completely support my decision to stay out of this situation. As for Dad, Rebecca, and Tyler, they'll figure something out because people always do when they don't have enablers to fall back on anymore. Maybe Tyler will finally get a real full-time job and start acting like an adult. Maybe they'll learn to live within their actual means instead of pretending they're wealthier than they are. Maybe Dad will realize that treating your children fairly matters more than keeping your second wife happy. Or maybe they won't learn anything meaningful and will just keep making the same destructive patterns in whatever smaller place they end up living. Either way, that's not my problem to solve anymore.